Thank you. It's great to be working with you today to implement quadratic voting in places. My name is Joe Lamke, and as an architect, my primary focus is creating physical aspects of living. However, past research and experience have taught me that organization, those intangible operational practices, make a significant contribution to building great things. Great buildings emerge from great clients, and great cities emerge from great governance. Animate's physical work has introduced us to some great organizations, and we've been able to build some great projects. We've worked with great scientific organizations, building physical places, such as winning the commission to design the Theory and Computing Sciences building. And I've conducted research at the Santa Fe Institute, creating this agent-based simulation of dudes running around, interacting, making deals, and adding value to the landscape, which then evolves into multi-scaled places. So that was fun, but let's focus on implementing quadratic voting. So we want to unpack the notion of place. A place is where people come together and interact. It might be a city, a town, a farmer's market, the Easter market here in Detroit, this conference, or a stock exchange. People and cultures across history have valued places at any scale that are defined by a permeable boundary and an active center. So let's add some detail to the idea of a permeable boundary. Similar to personal space, a permeable boundary is where a place relates to other places. The boundary occurs where urban life relates to the ecological environment within which we live. The recent prevalence of farmers markets is one indicator of this intangible attraction. More so, this fuzzy boundary space between the active center and the ecological open space is where invention happens. And by contrast, hard walls in any civilization are attempts to resist evolution. Moving between the ecological open space and the active center represents the desire and the opportunity to learn. So fresh ideas are emergent at the permeable boundary, and active centers are the most frequently used spaces. Repetitive interactions create over time the structures, regulations, and organization of widely varied social interactions. This is how cooperation emerges. Interactions add value to a place, and this becomes civilization. Simultaneously, the ability to come and go, the sense of freedom to participate or not, via the openness of transportation is essential, and it is a means of communication. One more characteristic of places, operationally, they are multi-scaled and networked. Many city planners have noted the power laws in the distribution of differently sized cities on the landscape across all civilizations. Complex adaptive systems have a fractal, nested structure of self-similar patterns. So as we think about quadratic voting in places, keep in mind that the pattern is multi-scaled, that voters' interests, expectations, and responsibilities are multi-scaled and related to place. So now let's turn and unpack good governance. One of the things we have learned is the importance in the levels of organization. Collective intelligence research abounds about the relationship between group sizes and quality decision-making. These 7 levels of organization naturally correspond to governance, populations, and the physical construction of place. Might be my Chicago upbringing, but I learned that gerrymandering districts is corruption in these levels of organization. In examples of good governance, we find levels are used to distribute responsibility, resources, and importantly, to obtain useful feedback and direct that feedback to the relevant decision-making process. A quick digression about the naturalness of these levels. Like any good pattern recognition machine, you might be wondering where these levels come from. In one example, it turns out that horses happen to prefer certain speeds of moving, which correspond to their oxygen consumption. And over millenniums, human beings have recognized these patterns and then developed terminology to refer to each distinct speed, walking, trotting, and galloping. What's really cool is that horses' most preferred speeds are related to their optimal energy consumption. So this is one clue relating the levels of organization to transportation. So when building places, transportation is physical flow, and architects coordinate the flow of people at different levels into space. This gives character to space, which people then turn into a place. This chart illustrates how we found these levels. It clarifies that in all of history until 1900, there were only 3 levels of transportation. Coordination appeared relatively straightforward, and we ended up with U.S. representative democracy. Then suddenly, in an evolutionary timescale, there are now 7 levels of transportation. For the last 120 years, human beings have struggled to understand the patterns of interactions that new transportation and communication technologies create. So now we want to know what happens when we use these 7 levels to govern and to create space. We think visibility becomes essential. Visibility assists people to associate a particular governance issue with a place where it can be addressed. Visibility coordinates the scale of an issue with the appropriate inclusion of voters, resulting in more accurate collective decision making. It also reduces fatigue from too many issues overwhelming voters with details and relevance. As we refine quadratic voting and good governance, we act like biological engineers. We're working to change operational processes, which will then change into an intended physical result. The Kid Cities mechanism is our architectural tool to implement better places. Animate created the Kid Cities mechanism to evolve an increased spatial contrast. Distinct places emerge through the actions people take in a place. So let's clarify why we want an increased spatial contrast. Across different physical landscapes, each different physical landscape reflects different governance organizations. Some are limited by outsiders, and some are limited by in-group social norms, and others are prone to catastrophic collapse. We are suggesting that a multi-scaled, highly correlated fitness landscape provides the visible opportunity people need to understand the ecological and usable context of their voting interests. It reflects a higher organizational effectiveness and is more robust to global economic activity. So to wrap up now, we have 4 different projects that we can discuss in this context. Animate and Golden Mean Development proposed this arrangement of buildings in southeast Portland. The project is currently waiting for some land acquisition details, but it's located on the new Max Orange Line, and it becomes the new district-level active center between 2 neighborhoods with many single-family homes and between 2 industrial commercial areas filled with businesses. The site includes a mix with residential above rail lines and public district governance space up top on a private sector office building. Our ask here is we're looking for guidance on using common ownership self-assessed tax initiatives for financing the development, and then once built, we want to use quadratic voting for the successful enrichment of ongoing community activities. In another project with Midland Properties, Animate proposed this short 30-story building in downtown Chicago. Surrounded by taller projects, 676 would have been a normal building with a neighborhood inside it. The 7th level included space for governance and neighborliness inside the building. Unique to this project, we propose to construct the upper floors in a hybrid manner, supporting easy conversions from residential to commercial occupancies, accommodating an unpredictable market demands. This construction type, combined with the cost mechanism, will enable tenants to retain value from their physical and community investments when they move or change space inside the building. So our ask here is, we're looking for regular developers interested in building similar projects where quadratic voting and cost can be used to grow communities with the development of regular private sector neighborhood projects. So at a much bigger scale, the hypothetical small tower was intended to be a metropolis-scaled governance building. Visibly symbolic, it marks the active center of metropolitan Portland. The small tower has a smaller government occupancy at the top of the building, and the middle is occupied by interested parties through the cost model, with the same flexibility we discussed earlier. A vertical public street demonstrates that municipalities can create more land in the active center by creating vertical space and generate revenue from a common ownership model in tall buildings at any active center. Symbolically and practically, the building serves residents of the metropolis at governance floors far above nearby buildings, and a sky park provides residents a fresh view of their metropolis. Our ask here is, we are looking for municipalities and charter cities interested in building similar projects where quadratic voting and cost will instigate the development of more robust urban places. Lastly, we have the Infinite Transit Flyway. This is a new transportation network. It's a level 5 framework for large metropolises. It is significantly faster than subways and highways, operating at 130 miles an hour. Typically above ground, it makes visible the connections between distinct places, roughly 10 miles apart, across the metropolis. The Infinite Transit Flyway integrates distribution loops of people and goods, instead of disconnecting the socioeconomic groups with subway lines. Multiple access points reinforce the center, and connection to the airport welcomes distant others. Our ask here is, we are looking for guidance in using quadratic voting and cost mechanisms to obtain the right of way, to structure the development process, to implement large-scale infrastructure in metropolises. We think the Infinite Transit Flyway is an innovative level 5 people and goods metropolis-wide entrepreneurial engine. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.